Um, Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Because Artist Talk is part of the group show. Uh, this group show's title is the same as the film from Hong Kong, the Hong Kong film, Wong Kar-wai's film. We are, delighted to, having this event. Um, let me introduce you two artists from the show, Emma Hapner and Jane Phillips. And we are also very happy to invite Victoria. Victoria is multi cultural background. Okay, so let's start.
Um, I'll start by sharing that this is my first time visiting the space and seeing the show, and the work is so incredible. And I'm so happy to be chatting with Jane and Emma this evening. So we'll dive in. We have some questions prepared for both artists. We have one of Emma's beautiful paintings here in her signature pink. So, Emma, the first question I have for you is your work often centers on the intimate relationship between the body and emotion. In this exhibition, inspired by In the Mood for Love, how did you translate these themes into a visual language?
Thank you for such a thoughtful question. So, I think these themes can feel sometimes very complex and hard to encapsulate in words, especially. So, for me, the way that I try to do this is through images, like we all do. We're all artists here, and sometimes these things are much more easily expressed in our painting and in our art than they are through words. So, the main emotion that I took away from In the Mood for Love when I watched the movie, I did my homework before making this painting, did a little research, and the main feeling I got from the movie was vulnerability. And that really came through for me when the protagonist, Mrs. Chan, and that other guy, whose name I'm suddenly forgetting, but they were going through this really hard time in their relationships and discovering this infidelity in their marriages. And they found solace in each other. But to get to that point, they had to be vulnerable with each other and kind of admit what was going on. And I thought back to a time in my life a long time ago in a relationship when I was a lot younger, kind of suffering through something very similar. And I had to be very vulnerable in order to accept what was happening and kind of express my feelings about it. So that's what I was trying to encapsulate in this piece. And it's titled The Birth of Venus. And I was bringing to mind that sometimes we want to be this, beautiful, perfect goddess of love who never goes through anything bad. Just like the protagonist, the female lead in the movie, she puts on her beautiful clothes just to go get noodles and she shows herself in this perfect light all the time. And I think that I would strive to do that. But sometimes you're not floating on a seashell in the ocean. Sometimes you're sitting on the cold bathroom floor. And that nudity feels much different. And just the expression and the posing, I think, expresses the depth of emotions I was feeling while still worrying about things like how I looked and how I was being perceived. So I think vulnerability is a really important part of the movie. And just as women and in romantic relationships, I think it's something that we have to kind of get used to. I hope that made sense.
Totally. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, yes, and you created this piece for the show, right?
Yes, I did. I made this piece specifically for the show, although the imagery was kind of floating around in my mind for a while. But after watching the movie, it all kind of came together.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, Jane, a question I have for you. So, your work often navigates the space between memory and fiction, which resonates with the blurred narrative of time in the movie In the Mood for Love. How do you view memory as a material in your creative process?
Yeah, so I love hiking and I love getting out in nature. Sometimes difficult to do in New York, but I still go to Prospect Park all the time. And I always have my camera and I collect these little snapshots of where I am and what I'm doing. And in a way, my paintings become almost like a memory map of like those places that I've been. So I'll have, I'll invent the space that I put my figures in, but there are certain like touchstones within it that are from real life where I know like this tree came from a certain hike in Maryland, or this rock came from my favorite creek where I had an experience there. So I feel like it's almost all interwoven within these kind of real but imagined landscapes.
It's making me think. I mean, I'm diverting a little bit from the questions, but the first thing I thought when I saw your paintings were they have such a cinematic quality, which I had shared with you. Where does that come from? And is that intentional, or is that something that just sort of happens organically when you're painting?
I think it's really intentional. I'm kind of known for my dark and my light, that play and that dichotomy in mine. And I love some, actually, honestly, just like very dramatic lighting, which can kind of be a little silly sometimes and not make sense. But I feel that that gives it almost like a surreal quality to it, where my figures are in these landscapes that also become almost like psychological landscapes. And I struggle a lot with that dichotomy of like light and dark and good and evil, and splitting things into two when really it's a full spectrum of things. So I think some of my artwork is kind of trying to tackle that. And a follow up to what Emma was saying beautifully with nudity being something that's very vulnerable. My work too features a lot of nude forms, and that's exactly how I feel. Like I've my mom's always like, why don't you put them in little dresses or something? But it's two things where it kind of takes it out of time, where the nude form is just uh, how we are all the time at once at any time and given time and place. And that vulnerability is so important of being a woman and being able to find these places where you're comfortable being alone and being naked. Like that's very rare. So I think that for me, creating experiences for my models, one, when we're taking pictures, but also um, you know, creating the space that's like safe to be a little vulnerable like that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm like realizing you and Emma both have that connection in your work. You have the figure, the female figure who's also nude, although she is in a landscape, and Emma has her in a bathroom. And I was also thinking with your work, one thing that stood out to me is you have like, because you were talking a little bit about those polarities. But I was also thinking in the style of your work, because your large work is, that piece is so much more abstract and painterly than your smaller pieces. So I was curious about that as well.
I enjoy like I enjoy making things at a large scale, but also for the viewer having them be able to be encompassed within the landscape and kind of overwhelmed by it. Um, but then I make these figures that are really precise and really accurate, and that's honestly something that I've struggled with and I still continue to struggle with. I think sometimes I can have all of that energy and just kind of put it out on the canvas and go into my studio and have a 6 hour day where I'm just like running everywhere and like throwing paint all over the place. And some days I just have to sit really quietly and make smaller stuff. So it's always a challenge to kind of um, get those to work together.
I feel that they do work together really well, actually. And I also think it's like, it's really cool to see that, because I think oftentimes as artists, we feel like we have to choose a specific style when actually like your abstract work complements your figure, like your more precise representational work so well.
Thank you.
I could see you having an exhibit with both and creating this like really beautiful balance.
Yeah. I think I also, there's some amount of trying to find some confidence in myself and my figures. And I feel like having them be these more like solid constructs than this like tempest of emotional abstract land around them is really important as like a touchstone for the viewer. You know, we see ourselves in each other. So even if it's a portrait of a friend or a self-portrait or anything, you know, I'm seeing a lot of different people and seeing myself in it.
Yeah, totally. I was thinking with your work, like it almost felt like you were entering through the large piece, like entering through the grass, and then you kind of arrive at where the figures are.
Oh, cool! I love that.
It was, yeah,
I haven't really
it was
thought
really
about
interesting
it,
to see them together.
Yeah,
amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So Emma, the question I have for you, the film is filled with restrained emotions and unspoken love. How does this sense of indescribable feeling manifest in your work?
That is a really, really good question. And I think it is hard to describe. And if I was good with words, I'd be a writer, is what I've always kind of thought. And I think that's what drives me to paint these images. And sometimes I will have these images in my mind and not really know why until I've already made it, until I've put it on the canvas. And I'll be kind of attracted to these images and have to figure out why. So I think with this one specifically, and the way I felt it linked to the film was this complexity and this duality of our experiences in romantic love, that they can be many things all at once. That even if you're going through something challenging, you might still be really in love with someone. And then the way you're perceiving yourself can also evolve and change through these relationships. So it's like so many little things at play that happen that can change who you are and the way you see yourself and the way you show yourself to the world, even though it might look very minute and almost indescribable, the way that you view yourself has completely changed. I feel like I'm not making any sense.
No, that makes total sense. And it also just got me thinking about like exploring romantic love is such a big part of your work, even outside of this painting in this exhibit. So I'm curious to know if thinking about restrained emotions and unspoken love, if those themes are kind of present in some of your other paintings as well.
Oh, definitely. And in my most recent solo show, All's Fair, the whole show is about romantic love. And I feel like this work really lives within that body. And they were exploring the complexity of romantic love with different symbols and also the color pink kind of overlying the entire show, almost like we're viewing it with these rose colored glasses, the way that sometimes love is viewed. And I was also drawing on a lot of medieval imagery, especially from medieval tapestries like that predate the 14th century, because I think that a lot of these ideas of romantic love and these roles that we fall into, these archetypes, have existed for hundreds of years, especially for women. And that was something that I've wanted to express. That I have a lot of kind of conflicted feelings within myself in my romantic relationships, like now and previously in my life as well, where I have this idea of what I should be because of things that I've been taught either through being raised as a Christian, there's a lot of Christian ideals that have influenced my work, or just as a woman and the expectations put on us by society. So I'm exploring those and the way that they kind of conflict with me and the things that I want. And I think that I try to help those come through in my work. Like this one, I have a Lana Del Rey lyric at the bottom: "Will you still love me when I've got nothing but my aching soul?" And it's from Young and Beautiful by Lana Del Rey, one of my favorite songs. And even though it's, a popular pop song, that line has just always resonated with me since I was very young. Because I think as a woman too, we feel like there's this, this clock ticking, like that you'll run out of time for romance and that you'll be too old or you'll be expired or things will change when you're older. And finding someone who will love you regardless of that can feel both exhilarating and scary. And I think I really want to strive to explore those emotions, even if it's in a more subtle way, since this is all typically happening, inside my mind.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you do it so beautifully. I also love in your work, I mean, there's so many, references to art history and I'm always thinking of the cloisters and those beautiful tapestries, but then bringing in, the Lana Del Rey lyrics and putting it in a contemporary context is really interesting. Um, Amazing. And, even though there are a few questions in here that are specific to you, Emma, and specific to you, Jane, I'm wondering if any, this question of exploring restrained emotions and unspoken love, the sense of indescribable feeling, if you can relate to that in your work as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, indescribable feeling is kind of my whole thing. No, because I think that painting is, like Emma was saying, a way that you can express yourself without words necessarily. And for me, a lot of um, the scale and making those huge energetic paintings, that's part of kind of expelling built up emotions within me. I have, a lot of anxiety, like lots of other people do in the in the modern world, and being able to sort of almost violently put something on canvas to get those feelings out, um, is a lifesaver for me. And the fact that I can take some of those emotions that weigh heavy on me and make something really beautiful with it, and something that other people resonate with, is, yes, very important. And as a youngster, I did a lot of pining after people that I probably shouldn't have, and um, for a while orbited around people that I didn't quite allow myself to touch. So, like, seeing the movie, really seeing a version of my younger self in it, was really cool. I guess cool, sad, heartbreaking, but kind of beautiful too. So,
Well, I was
yeah.
curious too, like as you share that, the figures in your paintings also look like there's kind of an, uh, as I was looking at them earlier, I was trying to understand or imagine what the emotions might be that they were feeling. It's almost like you're watching a movie and you hit pause and they're kind of in this state where you're not entirely sure what they're thinking or how they're feeling. But I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit too.
I think a lot of the feelings that I try to express through this series, the grasses kind of overwhelm and cover the the figures, and at once it's very protective. It's like almost like a nest of something, but it's also a little scary. And so I think just exploring those conflicting emotions again, this dichotomy of feeling um, vulnerable when you're alone, but also maybe at your most honest with yourself. And I think most of my work, if not all of my work, has had a single figure in it. And I have tried to play around with having multiple figures and kind of making the composition a little more complex. But it's always just been very important for me that it's just the one figure, because it's someone kind of alone with their thoughts, trying to burst through, existence, and how to contain all of those emotions and feelings.
That actually makes a lot of sense. That's kind of the feeling I got when I was looking at your work, but it's interesting to hear you talk about it. And now, of course, I want to go revisit the paintings after hearing you speak about them. The next question that I have is, how do you relate to the film In the Mood for Love? I feel like both of you have kind of touched on this and spoken to this, but in what ways does your current work respond to it? So I do feel like we've kind of answered that a little bit.
I can.
We feel free to expand on it.
Yes, the pining, the
Yeah.
unrequited love. This idea that in watching the film, just watching how much these two characters pass each other, and how they they just like brush next, barely touching, and thinking about like living in New York City and the hustle and bustle, just like finding those silent moments, I think, and um, yeah, I had something else and then it disappeared. So do you want to take over?
Yeah, we can come back.
Yeah, I think what kind of stood out to me most in the movie was our female lead, our protagonist, and her almost fears over what people thought of her. Because this is something that I've always experienced from a very young age, and I think a lot of women experience. And I remember the moment in the film where we don't really know if she's having an affair or if it's just, it's kind of left very ambiguous. But I think it was the landlady mentions that she's been spending a lot of time out, and then she kind of panics and just feels like, oh no, people are going to think poorly of me, they're going to view me badly. And she puts on this very kind of perfectly curated image and wants to keep this image of herself in her perfect marriage where everything is kind of beautiful. And I think that's something that really resonates with me because I think it's a constant thing that I'm trying to improve on in my life is not worrying so much about my image and the way I'm perceived and just being, but it can be very challenging. And I think a lot of my work does concern itself with almost an obsession with beauty and with femininity. And this comes through with the over the top pink, the girliness. And I think I have to try to find the balance between appreciating femininity and celebrating beauty, but also with letting go of an obsession with vanity. And I think finding the balance between the two is going to be a lifelong challenge. I think it'll have to be something that I'm always improving on. And I think that this is something a lot of young women kind of can relate to, especially in a world of social media where our image is so public and everyone, it feels like everyone's always looking at you and you want to appear perfect all the time. But I think allowing yourself to be imperfect, to be vulnerable, coming back to that theme of vulnerability is something that really resonated with me in the movie.
So, a question I truly think a lot of these can relate to, you both can speak to, but the next question is, how do you view the body as a vessel for emotional memory? Do the works in this exhibition carry a sense of personal nostalgia or documentation?
Yeah, these are definitely very thoughtful questions, which I do appreciate. They're making me think, which is good for me. But I think that, and I've kind of touched on some of these topics before, that for me, the body really does hold a lot of memory and a lot of emotion, especially using my own body, which took me a little bit of bravery to kind of get into, especially portraying myself nude. Took a lot of, I had to really push myself to get there. And in grad school at the New York Academy of Art, I was painting friends and peers and making it more about fashion and clothing. And I don't think I knew what I was trying to say. I think I had these like kind of overarching feminist goals, but by using other people as my models, I almost felt like I was projecting my own feelings onto them. And then once I started using myself and my own figure as my imagery and my paintings, I felt like I could be a lot bolder and more honest with what I was trying to say. And I also felt capable of expressing more difficult topics since it's like it's my own body. I can do what I want, my body, my choice, also in my my paintings. And I think it just allowed me to be braver, bolder, and more truthful about some of these themes. Because while I do think that femininity should be celebrated, I think it should also be examined. And we should think about the ways that our experiences and society has impacted us as women. And by using my body to do that, I think I felt more capable of expressing challenging ideas. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, it's funny because I'm sort of in the we've switched roles now where I was before doing a lot of self-portraiture, and then kind of switched over to doing a more diversity of bodies, my friends and people that are important to me in my life. And I still kind of consider them self-portraits though, because of this just like the universal experiencing of emotion, right? So um I interview all of the women that I take pictures of and paint and kind of see how they're feeling about their bodies and what emotions come up when they are in that vulnerable position, when they are maybe for the first time ever kind of being in that, naked in a field somewhere. um, and it's really cool to be able to facilitate that for them and that discovery. But yeah, it's just like a lot of different emotions come up with it, I think. Um, I think the most important one definitely is having almost in my pieces almost this imagined place where women can be nude and vulnerable without fear of anything, because that doesn't really exist in real life, and it's hard to come to terms with that. But like my paintings are almost this universe where bad things don't happen, I guess, in a way, at least outwardly. So,
which is interesting too, because I feel like the pose of the female figure that you have in your painting, she feels very guarded and vulnerable, and like I think maybe I interpreted that as like there was a little bit of fear there.
Um, it's interesting like the personal differences between the models, I guess. With that model, I think she was possibly a little more uncomfortable, and kind of portraying her in that way felt more like authentic to her personality, I guess, maybe. But maybe also I was projecting and like kind of felt some of those things too, a little bit. So.
Well, now I'm curious about your process. So do you stage every, like you choose the model and you stage them?
Yeah, it's a mix. I work from photograph, I work from life, and I take different references and kind of imagine things. I was lucky enough to go. I'm from Alabama originally, so I was lucky enough to go home a few summers ago, and I just put out a call to people that I knew, and I was like, "Who wants to model for me? It will be nude." And I had so many responses from friends that were like, "Yes, let's do it," which is really exciting and kind of surprising because I don't know if you do this too, but I forget that I'm an artist sometimes, and like our brains are really weird. And I'm all my friends are artists, so when non-artists kind of interact with me, they're like, this is amazing, and I'm like, oh, this is just like a Tuesday, like it's not really a big deal. But yeah, so I would put out a call and do photo shoots, and I had a friend that was friends with someone who owned a horse farm, and we were able to go out for an afternoon and actually take photos in the field, which being there, there was one point where the horses all came over, and I have a few pictures I haven't painted yet, but of my friends that are nude on the ground and these giant horses like circling around them. And that was a really terrifying, humbling,
Have you
beautiful
painted those
experience.
yet?
Not yet,
I'm
but
excited
I'm
to see
kind
this.
of digging through my files again to maybe move on to a new kind of series with it. And when I'm in New York, when it's very cold outside and I don't have access to a horse farm, I'll try to bring a lot of the natural material in and just kind of set up a photo shoot and set up the lighting I'd like, um, and just throw some flowers on somebody and take pictures. I'm really captivated with shadow and how those shadows kind of fall across the body and influence the body. So that's really what I'm trying to get a good idea of in those photo shoots, and then I kind of make up the world around it.
And did you feel like the paintings that you selected for this show, did you feel that they were the most connected to the theme for this exhibition?
I was really obsessed with the contrasting colors in the film. There's a scene specifically with Cho that has yellow light and a purple background. So I kind of duplicated that. I kind of stole that a little bit from it. And it just so happened I had been working with this model. She's a really close friend of mine, and she recently moved back to Singapore. So this was almost like a little love letter to her in a way, I think, of, you know, I had those photos for almost a year and hadn't done anything with them, and I had been missing her so much, that it was great to be able to use them, and they just happened to have a little connection to the story, which was really fun. So
amazing. I love that. Actually, it's a really nice segue into our next question, which I think you've kind of answered, which is, does this body of work incorporate any specific visual references, such as color or cinematic language, that echo Wong Kar Wai's film vocabulary. So I think that kind of spoke to it. But I might also love to hear your thoughts on that as well.
Definitely. I think as beautiful as I found the film, I found it more inspiring in concept than visually. Since I work completely monochrome, I was kind of like, dang it, don't get to use those amazing colors from the film. But I think what really spoke to me was the emotion and the kind of the concepts explored in the film romantically. And I really appreciated how subtle it was, just kind of a segue, how it wasn't overt and some things were so ambiguous. And that made the romance feel even stronger, I think. And that was something that I found really inspiring and want to continue to explore in my work, ways to express these ideas more subtly to help build the tension rather than doing things so like overtly and hitting the nail on the head. I think I could learn to be a little more subtle. So that's something I want to kind of practice doing in the future based on that film specifically.
Beautiful. And I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add. Um,
No, I'm okay.
But I love the lighting and how that
Yeah,
echoes
I
the
guess,
film.
yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit
Yeah.
the lighting,
Mhm.
yeah. I mean there's a number of shots I think where Sue is walking to get noodles down this like alleyway where the light and the dark of that is just so phenomenal. And these like transitionary shots in the film of the characters like walking to go do something when they're alone, maybe for the only time. You know, they're living with all these people, they're in this huge city, and maybe the only second they get to be alone is when they're walking by themselves. And I found this to be really, really beautiful. And just, yeah, subtle and silent,
Yeah.
which I like. And I think I also need a little, sometimes I have to catch myself in going a little too far, a little too overboard. So kind of walking that back.
In terms of
In terms of putting too much detail into it. You know, there's a point in the painting where I say, "Oh, I could walk away now and it could be done," but then that sometimes I feel like I just,
I know that feeling.
yeah, every art, you know, we're always trying to do that. So, yeah, I mean, his shots are so simple but profound. Yeah, I think that's a good lesson to take.
It could be interesting too. I'm just thinking, like, not to digress too much, but for your work, it could be interesting to see a painting that has your like representational elements, but then also some abstraction. I don't, but it's something I think. Yeah.
There's some of my work. It really did feel like these tiny figures that I made. I think part of the reason was because they were so small, but having them be so precise and you know a little tighter, not as abstracted or emotional. I some of my work does kind of venture more into kind of loosening up a little bit, but yeah, some I have a hard time working really small.
Yeah,
They're very precious
yeah.
and I love them.
They're very precious.
But yeah, it seems like I can't really fully express myself until I have a like 9-foot canvas in front of me.
I love that. But it's really beautiful in this exhibit to see your larger work and the smaller work together, and then sort of different styles. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And Emma, question for you. What role does emotional atmosphere play in your practice, and how do you create emotional tension within your work?
Ooh, great question. So, one way that I really specifically have been working to create some emotional tension is through the gaze. And I think that this plays a really key role, especially when making nude images of women. And although it's my own form, so I have less fears about the way I'm portraying myself, I do still want these images to be perceived in a certain way. I don't want them to feel voyeuristic or objectifying. So by using the gaze, and I almost always have at least one version of myself in a painting. Sometimes there's a lot of versions of me, but one of them always looks directly at the viewer as if to acknowledge their presence and look back at them. And I think for me that makes me feel more powerful in these images, even though it's something very small, just looking back at the viewer, the positioning of the eyes. I think it really changes the paintings for me, and it makes them feel more confrontational and more questioning. And I think it also is a reminder to myself to be more powerful and to maybe be more confrontational when needed, and to, look right at someone and look them right in the eyes, even if I'm just doing it in a painting. I think that is really important to me in expressing power.
I can definitely see that. And I'm also thinking of some of your paintings where, um, the figures are larger than life. And then, of course, I'm thinking of your painting with the many different figures and showing the different aspects of perhaps your personality or I love that. And I wonder, Jane, if you can relate to this question as well. Emotional atmosphere and emotional tension.
Yeah, I definitely say scale has to do with
Mm.
that. I really purposefully do try a lot of times to have my figures be life size or larger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's a way for me to take up space. I'm a very quiet person, and I grew up kind of, like I think a lot of young girls are, where it's just be quiet and stay in the corner and maybe don't,
Mm.
have an opinion, or don't share it with people. Um, and I still have a hard time kind of expressing myself through talking or arguments or anything like that. But the work really helps me to like reclaim that space where it's like I'm my personality might be a bit quiet and a bit shy, but my paintings can take up an entire wall.
Mm-hmm.
And these figures become um, they're they're unignorable, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and a lot of the models I choose are women that are larger bodied, and I think just representing them in a way that is very like in your face and unforgettable. That is really important to me. Um, yeah, and I think that with the mouse painting in particular, that was an interesting moment that actually kind of recalls memory too. It was on the High Line, um, and it was a rainy night, and I looked over, and I just happened to like immediately go straight to this tiny little mouse that was like hanging out on this piece of grass. And um, that's a really like stark memory for me in the city. um, so having like blowing up that scale and having it be something that kind of towers over the viewer,
Mm.
um, I think is really, really neat. I have a series of paintings that are of that same scale, where the viewer is almost like within the grass and within the
Mm.
wild things, and um, being able to feel sort of like overwhelmed and tiny.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I like playing with that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that in both of your paintings for
Mm-hmm.
sure.
Yeah.
And I think just, like as women feeling like we can't always, like maybe there's a mask or a veil and we can't always show our true selves.
Mm-hmm.
And through your painting, it's an opportunity to do that. Okay, Emma, this one was for you. And I think this might be the last one. And then perhaps we can open up questions to the audience. Um, so, Emma, the film explores a subtle internalized expression of emotion often associated with Asian culture. Does your work respond to or challenge this cultural sensibility in any way?
Oh, definitely. And I think a lot of those kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Those conventions that we see fairly often have to do with women specifically. And I know they cover a lot of Asian culture in general, but I think many of them have to do with women appearing very demure and very quiet, kind of like we were just talking about, always being very composed and polite and restrained. And I think that that's something I try to challenge in my work, especially by portraying myself nude, sometimes in massive stripper heels, which is really over the top. something I would probably never do in real life. But I'm trying to create this world where we don't have to be restrained. And I think that keeping in mind those conventions and the way they affect us in our daily life can inspire me to challenge them in my work, especially when it comes to the way women are portrayed and the way that women are often not allowed to express things like sensuality. I think that societal expectations can make that very limiting for women, and especially in a lot of Asian cultures where it just doesn't feel acceptable for that to be expressed. But it's also an undeniable part of life and a part of being a human, not just a woman, but as a person in general. So I think I strive to kind of subvert those expectations in my pieces.
Absolutely. And Jane, In the Mood for Love is a story about unspoken love as well as choices and regrets. How do those emotions manifest in your work, if you feel that they manifest in your work?
I think a lot the grass has almost become this sort of metaphor in a lot of my work for a lot of different emotions that we all experience, you know, all at once, I guess. And I think in some of my paintings, I think that regret is kind of almost woven into it a little bit, where there's exciting emotions and joyous and all of that, but still also sort of these like overwhelmingly dark emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think.
I could see that there's like moments of light in your work, but then how I felt when I was first looking at your paintings is like there's a little bit of an ominous feeling that I couldn't quite put into words, but was like really drawn to.
Yeah. I'll have to think about it more. I think that's actually that's a difficult question because it gets so personal.
Yeah.
With it. Like Emma was saying before, where sometimes it takes a while for you to kind of figure out what you're painting about.
Oh, totally. And it's never ending. It's always changing.
Always, yeah, it's always
as soon as you feel like
changing.
you know what you're painting about, I feel like it evolves.
Yeah, with the grass, I'd been painting it for like 3 years until I finally figured out, like, oh, yeah, it is about emotion.
Totally.
Yeah. Cheers.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.